Nascimento. I am the head of EMEA at Sensedia, and today I'll be talking about legacy modernization and how we can structure it in a wisely way. So how we can bring good practices, how we can think about modernizing the legacy application, and some other important topics about it. And before I start to talk about it, about the topic of the day, let me talk a bit about me. So I'm a Brazilian guy living in Ireland. I lived in the Netherlands as well. I have 3 girls. I enjoy playing guitars, as you can see in my background. I have overall 16 years of experience, a bit more of that. And apart from being the head of EMEA at Sensedia, I was previously the head of solutions for EMEA as well here at Sensedia. I worked for companies like Deloitte, Accenture as well. And before I moved to Europe, I used to work for Sensedia as a senior solutions architect there. I have a development background with Java, worked in previous roles like integrations and solutions architect, and I also worked with Salesforce. Also, I speak at events, so API Days, APIX. Normally, I'm the host of the Sensedia Gen session, a project that we run to bring different people to discuss some topics related to APIs. I also speak at some of these interesting CIO summits, and most recently, I was a speaker at the Open Banking World Congress. So, for the agenda of the day, like I mentioned, we are going to talk about legacy modernization, and one of the things that I want to bring is why should we modernize or enable. I also like to use this term, so enable legacy applications as well. What are the common strategies when it comes to legacy modernization? And also very interesting, I'm not going to deep dive into this topic, but how we measure success of this interesting initiative, very important one when it comes to organizations working into this big bang of digital transformation strategies. So starting from the beginning, why should we enable or bring our legacy to a modern strategy? I think that one very important variable here is to define what legacy means for an organization. Once we are able to define what legacy is, understanding why we should bring this legacy application to a modern standard, modern pattern, becomes much simpler. And I'm going to share some references later on, but a legacy application, it's an application that it's hard to maintain, hard to support, and to extend. Doesn't really matter how old that application is. What exactly that means? So, does it mean that if I built a microservices application a couple of years ago, can I consider that application as a legacy application? Yes, it does. Even if you have built your application following best practice, if during the creation, the conception of that application, you didn't really plan on how you would facilitate or enable integrations with third parties, or how you would expose services. So you build a very interesting modern architecture, but for an application that wouldn't really expose any data externally. And now if you need to expose any kind of information, a service from that application, and you are not able to do so, it means that your 2 years old application based on microservices, it's already legacy. So doesn't matter the age, it's actually how easy it is for you to extend your application. And then it helps us to understand why do we need to, let's say, modernize or enable one application. Also very important, once you have that definition, it's to classify what are the applications that you want to expose or that you want to modernize. So this concept of classification helps you to create some interesting things. One, it's a roadmap, and two, the priority or the prioritization or the urgency to get one application modernized. So then classifying these applications will help you understand what are the applications that have to be prioritized in this initiative. So once you have defined what a legacy application is for your organization, it's also important to understand what kind of classification and how to prioritize your legacy applications. I like to bring three different types of ways or types of classifications for an application. So one, it's what we call legacy. So you know that you have integration issues, it's hard to integrate with that application. So you have identified that maintaining that application it's becoming every time harder, and if you want to extend it as well, you are having issues. So modernization of that application becomes a priority. Another level is an intermediate level. So you are able to identify those issues, but it's not really a top priority to get that application modernized, updated to the standards of a modern application. Mainly because, let's say, it's a secondary application or it's an application that is not business critical. So you are able to identify, but then you don't really need to implement any kind of modernization at this moment. A third level is the modern application itself, where it was built on top of modern patterns, design, architectural standards, and you don't really have issues when it comes to integrating with that application or extending it or even a maintainability standpoint. It's all good. So then classifying your existing applications will help you with this prioritization. So once you understand what are the applications and what are the priorities, so you're able to create a roadmap to be able to then involve the right teams to help you building up this legacy modernization initiative. One thing that it's very important to mention, when it comes to legacy modernization, don't treat that as an ad hoc project as per se. So don't think that modernizing your applications means you will understand what an application issue is, you will build something new for it, and it's done. So treat the legacy modernization as an ongoing project or initiative where you will have a backlog, a roadmap of applications that you need to work on, and then you will keep reviewing those applications as new requirements come, as new applications have to be built. With that in mind, for you and for your corporation, what it means is that you will constantly be reviewing what are the applications that you have, where they are in terms of standards, and you will make sure that they're always up to date, always on a, let's say, top priority for you in terms of modernization in relation to the whole legacy application modernization and enablement. So then, before I jump into the common strategies, like I mentioned, once you understand why and what are the applications that are top priority for you, you are able to plan your modernization strategy, your legacy enablement strategy. And to help us with that, so once you understand what are the applications, why you're doing that, there are different strategies, different ways to modernize or to enable your application. And I'm constantly talking about enablement of applications, basically because not necessarily you have to rebuild your whole application. And most important, I'm going to speak about this further down the line here, we can combine different strategies as well. So Gartner brings some strategies. I was reading some other content as well. I really like this kind of model where we have initiatives that enable your applications, that help you to rebuild everything, But also there's something very interesting, that is thinking about or rethinking business contexts as well. So starting from the top one, encapsulate. So if you think about a legacy application, a database that has valuable information that you want to expose, and maybe the time to market. So coming up with a new architecture with new standards to enable or to modernize that application from a time to market standpoint may be not feasible, because you have the competition doing something, or even perhaps your internal process are not allowing you to be that agile. By thinking of encapsulating your existing applications, normally how we do that, we use APIs. You are quickly able to enable your application. So you're not rebuilding anything. You're basically creating a wrap around your application and being able to expose services, data out of that existing application. So this is one of the approaches, one of the strategies. Another strategy is replatform. So it's when you, for example, you want to scale up your application, but then thinking from an internal on-premise infrastructure. So all your platform will either cost you too much, or you have a cloud movement strategy. So moving from platform A to B, and of course putting together all the pros and cons about that new strategy. It's what we call replatform. It's a way to modernize it's a strategy to modernize your legacy as well. So you're moving from on-prem to cloud, and now you are able to scale your application much more than you would be able to do that before. Another approach, it's called refactor. Very interesting. We quite often think that refactor, it's about fixing bugs, about changing things, or maybe about let's say making a code more, or a cleaner code, for example. But another way to think about refactor, it's about code optimization. So it's about making your code cleaner but more efficient as well. So if you have an application that was built some time ago, or using the example that I mentioned before, where you have a modern application that was built 2 years ago, but you didn't think about exposing services out of that application, refactoring that code may be a strategy. So you don't have to rebuild everything, because your application architecture is already robust enough. You just need to make sure that some pieces of code are going to allow you to expose services, for example. So refactoring your application to make your code cleaner, more performant, it's another approach, another strategy to legacy modernization. Next approach would be the redesign. So it's when you are completely changing the architecture and rebuilding your application based on this new architecture that you are proposing. Various reasons to do that. The integration is one of it, for sure, but also if you think from a scalability standpoint, so maybe you have built your application still as a monolith, or some like say microlith, so microservices approach, but still you built microservice in a level that was not granular enough. So you end up building some kind of monolith application using microservices. So scaling up your application by reinventing, reviewing your architecture to be able to be more performant, or to be able to scale more your application, it's one of the other approaches. Overall, we are talking about technology here, right? So about wrapping up, enabling an application, moving platforms, optimizing code, creating a new architecture to be able to deliver your business objectives. But one thing that we cannot ignore also, it's about changing business processes as well. That's something that quite often we don't see, but it's another way to modernize your legacy application, mainly because you'll be reviewing your business processes, and by doing that you can come up with new ideas on how your new modern application will have to perform to deliver those business requirements. So whatever strategy you are thinking of, also consider, if possible, reviewing your business requirements, reviewing the business functionalities that you're bringing to the platform. So coming out of the definitions, talking a bit about some architectural approaches that we can use to modernize legacy applications, I'd like to bring some of them. In building a microservices layer, it's one of the approaches that we can think of, and it helps plenty of benefits. So first of all, when it comes to the wrapping up approach or the enablement approach that I was talking earlier previously in the previous slide, we can leverage microservices to become the first layer of services that will provide the legacy application resilience, security, scalability, protection, to then enable or prepare the grounds for a future replacement, decommissioning of your old legacy application. So this layer will enable you to protect, to build the first functionalities using a modern approach, and also to get something ready to replace your legacy application. And then, if you think about your legacy application and some of the issues that I mentioned before, which are problems or difficulties to integrate with how you expose data, and that should be one of the drivers to modernize a legacy application. Once you build this layer of microservices, you manage to build a new architecture, you manage to build an application that is now resilient, but then how you will expose that data? Are you going to do that directly from the microservices? No, not really. Of course, it all depends on your approach, on your architecture, but the most common ways to expose information, expose services, it's either by using APIs or events. So, and very interesting to mention, I said, are you going to expose your microservices? You can do that as well. So if you have a strategy to perform internal integration, so we are talking about two types of integrations here, right? North and south when it comes to APIs, exposing something externally, and east and west communication as well, so internal integrations. Depending on how mature your internal integration layer is or your microservices development, you can leverage that's called direct integrations between microservices. Not going to deep dive into this, but just keep in mind that of course it is possible. Your microservices can also communicate to each other, absolutely. But the most common ways, let's say, are APIs and events. So different distribution channels that you create, and you leverage the same microservice, the same service that you build, and you can expose either through an API if you need to have online response for your requests, or you can also think about event-driven architectures. So you expose business asynchronous events communication. Very interesting to mention as well that your APIs or your internal services, quite often we think about, okay, I'm building my microservices, I'm communicating through APIs, but what if you also use events for an internal approach? That's another very interesting standard to help you to modernize your legacy applications. So you build this standard where you can create, I'm going to use the term here, queues of events. So you can protect your legacy application if you know the limitations that you have, and you can still have a very huge traffic coming from your partners, from your marketplaces, whatever kind of channel that uses your APIs, and protect your backend, your legacy, with the microservices layer leveraging events, meaning that you will create your queues and then you will process those requests following the pressure that your microservices layer can support and provide those to your legacy applications. So your legacy applications limitations can be protected by microservices and events. So events not only for external communication but also internally to manage the load. And then how do we measure success? So you manage, so just recapping very quickly, we understood what we wanted to do, we identified those patterns, and then how do you know if our initiative was successful enough? I like to say that we have two different ways to measure success of a legacy modernization initiative. From a business standpoint, again, it all depends on the business goals, what business is trying to achieve, but different ways to measure the success is if the strategy, business strategy is to be able to onboard partners quicker. So what is the time that took you to start onboarding partners, new partners? And also another way to measure is the number of partners in a given time. So measuring the performance. Some examples, some customers say, yeah, it normally takes me 6 months to onboard a partner. How do we do, or what do we do to bring that process down to a couple of weeks? So how you measure the success? Are you able to onboard partners in a couple of weeks? When it comes to an omni-channel strategy, if you have multiple APIs connected for different distribution channels, were you able to create one single API? And don't get me wrong here, I'm not talking about only one API, but you have per service, so you have one API that serves multiple channels. So you have one customer API, you have one order management API, and all your channels use exactly the same API to communicate, to create orders, to get customer data, to process payments. Customer journeys as well. How many applications your customers have to interact with to create a bank account, for example? Did you manage to get that down to one single application that communicates to all your APIs at once? Or still your customers have to go from application A to B to C? So all of these are examples on how we can measure success. From a technical perspective, there are several ways, metrics that we can bring to understand if our initiative was successful. But three that I think are very important is the latency. So did you manage to reduce your processing time? So you used to process a transaction in a second. Did you manage to reduce that down to milliseconds by modernizing your application? The stability of your application as well. So you used to have specific uptime, and now you manage to get that even much better with the new approach. So you're more scalable, you're more protected, you're more stable at the end. Also, one very important way to measure success is reusability. So how many times a service that you created was reused by a number of applications that you have. Those are just a few of the ways that you can use to measure success, but very important ones. And just to wrap up, legacy modernization shouldn't really be treated as a one-off project. Think about continuously looking at your applications, continually categorizing, prioritizing them, or how you're going to modernize them. Different applications will for sure require different approaches, and think about the best approach for that application. So don't think that if you had an old database and you managed to wrap it up, that will be the approach to follow for all your applications. Think about using different strategies depending on the requirements that you have. And important, I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about this, do combine different approaches. So if you're able to quick start by wrapping up your application, exposing APIs, and then behind the scenes review your architecture whilst you're also thinking about reviewing your business, combine. It may look like it's too much, but depending on what you're trying to build, thinking ahead, thinking about not solving the problem that will be delivered in 6 months time, but what you're building for the next 5 years. So if you manage to bring all of that together, your initiative will be much more robust. And from a technology standpoint, uh, it may always be good to think about technology, so it's a good driver, but also think about the business processes, like I just mentioned. Think about the business. Don't think only that legacy modernization, it's a technology driven initiative. Think it from a business perspective as well, because businesses will for sure benefit much more than the technology, depending on the scenarios. That was me. Thank you very much for your time. Feel free to connect me on LinkedIn. Send me an email if you want to know more about legacy modernization, how we are approaching this here at Sensedia. More than happy to have a chat with you. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. See you soon.